Welcome to Let's Talk AppSecOps. My name is Mark Lambert. I'm Chief Product Officer here at ArmorCode. And there's been some exciting news this week. You might have seen that we just announced our Series B. So I want to just say a big thank you to the ArmorCode community, our customers, our advisors, our investors. It's been a tremendous journey so far, and we're looking forward to so much in the future. If you get a chance, check out the TechCrunch article. Also, check out our feature on the NASDAQ Tower. All very exciting times here at ArmorCode. And one of the exciting things is that we are now joined by an industry-leading CISO. So my new good friend, Karthik. Karthik, welcome to the team. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me on your show. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone who's watching. Again, as Mark said, I'm Karthik Swarnam. I have been in the security business for almost like 30 years, mostly as a chief security officer for large Fortune 1050 companies, doing practically, securing our enterprises as a lot of you do every day. Right? I have the opportunity to now pivot and join ArmorCode as a chief security and trust officer. Want to be able to take all the practical experiences that we have. One of the things that I have always thought about, Mark, is that as I'm an enterprise chief security officer, I'm helping one company at a time. At ArmorCode, I think it looks like we have an opportunity to touch multiple companies at a time, right? If we can fundamentally create a platform that helps resolve security risks at a broader scope, is going to be a changer in the industry. And henceforth, I'm very excited and super excited to be here at ArmorCode. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining the team, and I'm looking forward to you being a regular on the podcast as well. And one of the things that we see within the community, I think you put it perfectly there, is like being able to help more than one company at a time, and being able to leverage your experiences. You're running organizations, software security programs, and broader security initiatives. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because I think one of the challenges that I see a lot of people face is just, where do I start? The mountain of different technologies, the mountain of data that's being thrown at it, the sheer size and complexity of the attack surface. Where does somebody start?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, Mark. I think we don't lack the amount of data that we need today, right? There is, a plethora of data that we have from a vulnerability perspective, from our security practices perspective, right? Also, we have been traditionally following what I would call as first in, first out problem, right? You discover a vulnerability, you go fix a vulnerability, right? Aging reports and so on and so forth, right? I think we're at an inflection point where the approach to solving security risks has to be entirely different. To a point, I would say we need to start thinking in an unconventional manner, right? Let's take a risk-centric approach, right? I think when you bring in all the data and all the information associated with it, and then you can apply the intelligence on top of it to be able to understand what is at risk and what needs tending, immediately versus how can you prioritize, where you go about doing, right? And I think that's kind of where the tools are, evolving and evolving and getting, good progression right now. I think with that, you will be able to see the forest from the trees, right? Not look at individually, but look at it holistically, more in an hierarchical sense, what kind of risks that we need to be able to address so that we are able to minimize any kind of a business impact, right? And keep the businesses running. Yes. So looking through holistically is a key component, and addressing risks that matters is a vital component of how security management happens going forward.
Yeah, so really kind of like that. You said business, I think like 5 times there, right? Understanding the risk to the business and not just focusing on the vulnerability and making sure that we address all of our vulnerabilities, but really address the vulnerabilities that matter, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. I mean, it's, we live in a world where you can't really choose to say, well, can I fix this or can I fix that, right? You got to fix this and that, but then how do you choose to fix this and the ampersand that comes back into how does that contribute back to the business systems and the application? So I think the convergence is key, right? It's not just software security. It's not just application. It's not just the data. It's not just the infrastructure. And even if you double click with an infrastructure, it's not just the systems and the network and the end user compute or the client access mechanisms, right? It's the entire landscape has to be looked at it holistically and kind of then come back and say, how do we go ahead and resolve and address those vulnerabilities or risks that we are exposed to?
Yeah, so bringing data from across those different sensors that we have across our ecosystem, and then prioritizing based upon kind of the business critical assets. But, you know, one of the things that I see organizations struggle with is just such a massive attack surface. And, you know, people going, well, you know, I know I have cloud instances, but I got no idea who they belong to. You know, how do you start rolling out that classification? How do you start really getting at least some intelligence that you can start associating business impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think you very well said, right? I mean, you know, how do you get, you know, a handle on what's out there for you, right? Like, you know, I think, you know, I preach quite a bit saying that what you cannot measure, you can never manage. So obviously having the discovery and having that measurability from in terms of what your assets are that are out there, not only what your assets are out there, you know, having that contextuality of how those assets tie back to your business, right? Criticality of the business itself, right? So I think you should start from saying, you know, what am I in the business of, right? You know, you may be a telecommunications company, maybe a retailer, you know, what business am I in? And what are those, you know, business systems and capabilities that help me to deliver my business objectives? And then look at saying that where are those, you know, systems and assets sourced from? And then do I have visibility, right? You know, I think the boiling the ocean concept is probably not going to work, right? And the way I would look at it is two ends of the bookend, right? One is, you know, grassroots and ground up, and you're looking at all of your assets and IP addresses and applications and so on and so forth. And then the other end of the bookend would probably start from, okay, what is my business and what are the capabilities that I need for my business to be able to deliver? And what are the components that are contributing for those businesses to function? And then look at those assets, right? So when people talk about, you know, CMDB, right, it needs to be viewed from both angles, right? Like, how do you, you know, skews these bookends so that you're coming to a point where you exactly know, you know, where your sweet spot for you to be able to focus on.
Yeah, so getting that low-level inventory of all of the assets through, you know, detection software and what have you, but really nothing more than really focusing on talking to the business stakeholders and saying, what's your top 5 assets? What are the biggest things that you're worried about? And then focusing on those, and then focusing on the next and the next and the next until you close that gap. It sounds like a very kind of like logical process for kind of like scaling a program. And that's, you know, usually that's the first question. You know, the first question is, okay, where do I start? And then the next question is, how do I scale? So, you know, beyond asset classification, what have you seen as the barriers to scaling within an organization? And what are some of the tips that you've taken over your years as to how to get over those barriers?
Yeah, I mean, definitely scaling and operating at a scale is definitely a challenge, right? Like, it's easier when you have a very, you know, clean, hygiene, small footprint of technical landscape, right? But when you start to expand that, and when you talk about the size and scale of larger enterprises, you know, you still have to be, the problem is exactly the same. And I think the approach should be exactly the same, right? Keep asking the question, what if, and what happens if something were to happen to this particular system, right? Can I deliver my goods and services? Can I service my customer? Can I be able to get paid when I do that, right? And then map those systems, and the rest will fall in place, right? And if you try to solve, you know, for nth number of assets in your environment, it is, again, as I said when the starting of the show, that we need an unconventional approach to solving security risks, right? So that from that perspective, when you think of it, you know, can I put my hands or, you know, arms around it to assets that I really care about and matter to me, right? I'm not saying we should be ignoring all of the other assets, right? You should still do the grassroots movement and continue to do that. Continue your process will work its way in. So hopefully these two approaches will meet in the middle, you know, and obviously that would eliminate that, you know, gaping, you know, that filtering point, basically.
Yeah, and as you talk about asset, really, and you said this earlier, it's not just about the infrastructure, it's about the code base, the repositories, the business systems that are in support of your core business, right? If you're a retailer, it's the retail scene components. If you're telecommunications, it's protecting that infrastructure and making sure that people can make phone calls. Because if you can't make phone calls, you can't sell your product. So we've now kind of like got started. We're incrementally trying to scale. How do you measure how, because you said, if you can't measure it, it doesn't matter, or you can't monitor it, right? How do I now start measuring the improvements of the program? What are the key things that I want to be looking at and saying, this number needs to be going down, this number needs to be going up, or steady state? Kind of like, what are the key metrics that you look at and you think about for ongoing kind of assessment of your program, and if you're getting better or getting worse?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is two tier of metrics to think about, right? One tier of metrics is, am I getting whatever my task list is getting smaller and smaller by the day, right? Maybe if you double click into it, it is more of the vulnerabilities count going down, right? That's a traditional way of looking at it. And I think we should probably, in some fashion, form or fashion, we should continue that, right? I'm not saying we should ignore that, right? The second way of looking at it is, have I fixed any of the risks and vulnerabilities that matters to the business, right? Meaning, are those vulnerabilities or risks that are associated with a particular business asset, right? Critical business assets, or the crown jewels that we talk about. The second component is how sensitive those risks are, right? Like, is it exploitable? I think I am learning. I'm relatively new to ArmorCode, and I'm learning, and I'm super excited, right, as I see that, right? Because you all bring in that contextual view of, not only you have an asset, not only you have a vulnerability, what vulnerability and what asset matters, and why does it matter? Is that an exploitability, right? Is that, you talked about attack surface management aspect of it. Is it sitting on it, right? And the level of exploitability that you see in the wild, that piece also comes into play, right? So the measuring aspect should be, are we making progress, which is a critical measure, right? Like the question is, are we getting there, right? Are we there yet? Question, right? Either we ask that when you're a 5-year-old, and we're going to ask that when you're a 65-year-old. Are we there yet? And I think the answer to the question, are we there yet, is going to be not just a one single, format, but it is going to be, are we fixing the vulnerabilities and risk that matters to the assets on a timely fashion, right? What does that mean? It kind of breaks down into critical assets, exploitable vulnerabilities and situations, and on our on the type of vulnerabilities that we're fixing it, right? And also be ability to be able to say, are we collectively doing it, right? Like fixing all of the application vulnerabilities for a business system and ignoring all the infrastructure vulnerabilities is of no good, right? Because you still run with that risk of an impact when something were to happen to that system, right? I would rather go ahead and say, how clean are my business assets, right? That means, are my fixing not only one type of vulnerabilities, I'm fixing all types of vulnerabilities. That matters, right? And I think the key, the qualifier that I would say is, are we fixing things that matters, right? And I think tools, there is a plethora of scanning tools everybody's discovering, right? But that intelligence is the key component, right? You need to be able to take all the data and ability to, overlay and provide that intelligence to say, yeah, you know what, you have 10,000 vulnerabilities, but here are those 20 things that matters, and here's why it matters, right? Either, because of your attack surface exposure, maybe it's on a critical assets, that's all good, right? But beyond that, what is the level of intelligence that we have from an exploitability, right? And if I fix one, am I getting, do I need to fix two to get fixing one aspect of the assets, right? So that's a critical component as well.
Yeah. So are we fixing things, but not just at that macro level of, are we fixing all of our criticals? Are we fixing all of our criticals that are exploited on our business critical assets? And yeah, you're spot on. That's exactly what we do from our risk scoring and prioritization framework that we introduced last month, which is really around kind of like, how can I look at something and make sure that I'm keeping the number under control? So one of the things that I think you're in a very unique position, certainly within ArmorCode, right, is that you've slept or eat and slept this whole world. So the question is like, what would stop you from sleeping? What was the things that used to kind of like keep you awake at night? As you were kind of like pushing out new programs or even just trying to catch up with kind of like industry events? What were the things that would keep you awake at night?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would say is, do we have a handle on our, landscape, right? Do I know exactly it's less so of have you ever fixed all your vulnerabilities, or it's more so of do you know where exactly your vulnerabilities are when that vulnerabilities start to manifest into, I'm keeping this context to vulnerability discussion, Mark, right? I mean, there's 14, 15 other domains within security that we can talk about, right? Identity management to governance to risk to all sorts of other things that we can get down the path of infrastructure. I'm not saying we should ignore any of that. So in any of those 15 domains or 14 domains that you can talk about, when you double click it, you need to be able to understand what matters in those domains, right? So when we talk about AppSec and software security and software supply chain, right, we need to be able to look at, do we know exactly where our exposure points are, and do we know exactly what level of vulnerabilities that we are kind of exposed to, right? That way you kind of can go to it quickly when the threat starts to escalate. Do we have a mechanism for me to, you don't want to be discovering at the 11th hour when your threats are escalating, do we even have the problem, right? You better know where your problems are, and you better start to work on those problems, right? What keeps me at night is, I joke around saying that nothing keeps me at night because, everything is solvable, everything takes time. But that said, I think if any organization doesn't have that visibility or a way to be able to integrate and look at and collate and see, well, if I need to really quickly jump and fix things, I can do that. And then they should be worried about it, right? So that's critical to how we would address security going forward.
Got it. So to really making sure that you have, as you said, having the visibility and having an ability to respond, because you can't predict when the next event is going to happen. But if you know where your potential risks are and you have confidence that you'll be able to respond and affect that, then I think that's kind of like, sounds like that's your comfort blanket.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at it saying that, okay, measure what you have and proactively, start to address those risks, which I would throw more into the prevention and proactive capability bucket, right? But then also have this visibility so that you can understand what's out there in your asset base, right? And which gives you the opportunity to respond quickly. I think the companies and organizations and enterprises can differentiate themselves, right? One that cannot respond and react quickly, and the others can respond and react quickly, right? And that makes a world of difference, right? If you have the tools and capabilities and visibility that can either you're able to fix it, or at least gives you that close enough contact to be able to say, yes, I can respond if on a quick dime, that matters, right? Companies can survive and companies cannot survive, depending upon not only how they protect, more so on in terms of how of their response capabilities or how quickly they can respond to things, right? So
yeah, I think that's great. And I look forward to having more of these conversations now that you're on the team. I look forward to hearing more as you're connecting more with the community directly as well, and we can you can share some of those experiences. I know you wrote a blog about kind of like your exciting journey to ArmorCode, so we're going to link that in the show notes. I also wrote a recent blog as well, which is around kind of like oriented around the funding announcement and how we're going to be evolving the ArmorCode platform, the new directions we're going to be taking. But with that being said, I think we should wrap this episode. Click like and subscribe. We're really excited about the next steps in our journey. Karthik, thank you very much for joining again today, and I look forward to connecting again very soon.
Absolutely, Mark. My blog is about need for speed in the world of security, and I think we'll get there with the tools and capabilities that we have at our disposal in the environment. I think we're in it together to win it. So, looking forward to many more chats with you, Mark, as well. Take care.
Yep, and Formula One, a passion that we both share. So I think, looking forward to getting that out. So, all right, thanks everybody. Stay safe. Look forward to seeing you on our next episode. I think we've got our Christmas special coming up soon. So look forward to seeing you on that. All right, take care. Have a great evening.